So Carolyn, I'm going to begin and then you're going to take over, right? After I'm finished. So, but jump in if you want to share. So I'm Laurel Donnellan, and we're going to introduce ourselves in a minute. Then we're going to talk about work. I'm going to lead our discussion about work and changing careers. And Carolyn's going to talk about wealth and help us reflect on wealth. Then we're going to wrap up and talk about next steps. And along the way, if you have questions, we have a small group, so feel free to ask questions. I'm the founder of Compassionate Leader Circle. I'm also a contributor at Forbes.com. I write about compassionate leadership. My discipline is organizational change and career change and leadership change. I went to Columbia and Cornell, and I've also been a guest teacher this year at several business schools. So I've worked at UC Davis, University of Denver, Cornell, and Wharton this year. I'm very happy to be with you. Carolyn?
Thanks, Laurel. My name is Carolyn Wetzel. I'm a certified financial planner and private wealth advisor, and I've been working in the financial services industry for about 20 years. From an education perspective, I went to both Cornell as well as University of Connecticut, and I'm passionate about providing people information so that they can make informed financial decisions. And this topic today has an extra significance because I personally initiated a professional transition. So I love to be there to guide others, to support others as they make their own decisions around their financial and professional futures.
So a Compassionate Leader Circle and whatever programs we offer, we always provide curriculum, coaching, and contemplative practices. So Carolyn and I decided to start our evening together with just a short breathing exercise. So if you feel comfortable, close your eyes and get comfortable and just breathe through your nose. Try not to change your breath. And if you are, if you do have your speaker on and you have some background noise, you might just want to mute your microphone so we can all be in quiet. That's great, thank you. So closing your eyes, breathing through your nose, try not to change your breath. Breathe in the idea of calm and breathing everything else out. Breathing in the idea of calm, breathing everything else out. Just letting go of everything that you had to do today to get here and everything you have to do later after you get off the call, and doing your best to just be present with everything that's happening in this moment through your breath. So breathing in the idea of calm, breathing everything else out. Letting that idea of calm land in your heart and take on a color if you can. So just noticing your heart, your connection to self. Taking one more deep breath and letting that out, and then coming back to the program. So for the last 22 years, I've been helping people transition from just a job to work that they love. I started this process I was in graduate school. I started interviewing people that loved their work. I call them the super satisfied. And I found that they had characteristics that could be learned. So I think sometimes we think that people that love their work just kind of fell into it, or they had a spiritual calling. But in fact, we know from 22 years of working with people that anyone can have work that they love if they do the work to figure that out. Part of what I realized in this process was the language that we have for work didn't really help us find what I call soul work. So we created some language around it. Unremarkable work is that work that is not economically and or emotionally stable. It often drains you of energy. So if you look at the rain in this graphic, you can think about that being unremarkable work. It creates burnout. It often creates illness. It creates stress. It's not sustainable. Underneath the remarkable work umbrella are two types of work that we'd like our clients to move into if you're doing unremarkable work. The first is bridge work, and the second is soul work. Soul work is really the goal of when we work with clients, is figuring out what is the absolute best use of your passions and purpose. And that's how we define soul work. And bridge work is work that is remarkable and it supports you doing soul work. So if your soul work is being a sculptor, bridge work might be learning how to sculpt and maybe working in a gallery so you can learn the art business. The idea is to have a good combination of bridge work and soul work, or ultimately, ideally, we'd like to help you make money from your soul work. That's not always the case. So for example, if parenting or volunteering is your soul work, you may have to have bridge work that pays you to do your soul work. I'm lucky enough that I get to get paid for my soul work. So as you look at this, I'd like you to think about, where are you on this little map? Are you doing unremarkable work? Are you doing bridge work? Or are you doing soul work? So just make a note of that. So another model that we have in helping people transition from just a job to work that they love is what we call our pivot with purpose types. And we have 7 types. And as I go through this, I want you to think about which type you are, because there's a strategy that goes with each type. So if you are a learner, it means that you know you need to make a change, but you might not know what. So it's about learners, it's about really being open to what's next and being in the discovery and really leaning deeply into discovery. If you don't know which type you fit into, I always say default to learner. Learner is a good place for you to be. Likers are people that like their job, but they want to love it. So sometimes we work with people on resculpting their current business or their current job in that category. Leapers are people that are already in a transition. So you may be in a job search, or you might be someone who wants to switch divisions or switch roles in your company. Lancers are people that want to start or grow a freelance career. Launchers are people that are starting or growing a division or a business or organization. It can be a not-for-profit, it can be a for-profit. I forgot to say this earlier, but we're going to share these slides with you, so you'll also have the slides to look at after the webinar. Leavers are people that are focusing on their legacy. So thinking about retirement, succession planning, mentoring, volunteering, things like that. So we call those legacy leavers. And the last category are linkers. So if you're very committed and have a clear vision that integrates more than one of these types, then you're a linker. Often people that are working with us, they want to take on many types, but we encourage you to think about one because it really will help you focus and gain traction. And again, if you're not sure what you are, I always recommend just stick with being a learner. So those are the types. I'd like you to pick one that you identify most with right now so that we can help you with a strategy in the next slide. So taking what you know about your type, here's a quick strategy for you to think about. So if you're a learner, you want to focus on identifying and developing your passions. Some people that I work with don't know what their passions are, or they forgot what they are. So it's often a discovery process. I even have like an exercise where I tell people to go on a passion hunt, where you can either surf the internet, look at TV, go shopping, go on an exploration, and really just find those things out in the world that stimulate you, that interest you, that you're curious about. Those things can be activities, they can be disciplines of learning, they can be environments. Passions can fall into many different categories. If you're a liker, you like your job, and it may be about sculpting your role to make it more suitable for you. So you may want to think about a project that's going to add meaning or interest in your current role. And I've also worked with business owners that, for example, they like their business, but they've lost a little bit of interest in it. So recently I worked with a business owner that was doing well financially, and their shift was to start giving away some of the money that we're making and making part of their brand philanthropy as part of their business. So that's an example of a project. Leapers it's really important that you focus on having lots of options, so that, that can be, starting possibilities in your current organization. It might be looking at organizations in your town if you don't want to leave your town. It might be looking at online work. So you just want to generate as many possibilities as you can, so you feel clear and powerful when you're choosing your next position. Lancers want to focus on your pitch. So whether you're starting a freelance business or growing a freelance business, you really want to think about, what are you offering your customers, and how do you want to position yourself, and how do you explain what you do? Launchers want to focus on identifying the best people. So launchers could be starting a business or growing a business, and you want to really focus on, who are my best partners? Who are the people within the organization that can help me grow this organization? Leavers want to focus on purpose, and that's really like why you're on the planet or why you're working, and what is really calling you through your heart. So purpose is really important. And then linkers, if you're really clear that you want to and are able to do several of these roles at the same time, you have to come up with a reasonable plan for attending to your different roles. And when I work with people that are linkers, it's often sometimes managing their time differently. So I recently talked to someone who actually runs 3 businesses. He's doing pretty well, but he works 7 days a week. So with him, we've had to kind of work on, his plan is like, taking 1 day off a week and maybe dialing down his acceleration on one of his businesses and dialing up the acceleration on a couple of others. So that's the 7 strategies for the pivot types. And that is going to help you, if you're thinking about a transition, or if you are in a transition, help you move towards work that you love. So if you want to, the next step would be taking that strategy and turning that into what is one action, one baby step that you can take in the next 7 days, right? So if we go back to strategies, for example, if you're a Lancer and you're starting a freelance business, maybe you're starting a freelance business on the side, you might want to take on like rewriting your LinkedIn profile as a first step. That's an example of a baby step that you might be able to, work on this week. If you're a linker, you might want to just look at your calendar and make sure you're attending to your different roles. So that's what I'd like you to do, is write down your pivot type and the baby step that you're going to take on in the next 7 days. And I'll turn it over to Carolyn.
Thanks, Laurel. Now that we've spent a little bit of time talking about strategies for aligning your head, heart, and work, I'd like to pivot with you and do a reflection on how we can align heads, hearts, and wealth. And for many people, this way of thinking is a radical mindset. Admittedly, for many people, topics of wealth and money stir up a variety of emotions. By way of example, there was a study done earlier this year among 2,000 Americans, and 20% of them, 1 in 5, would rather spend 1 hour in jail than create a 5-year financial plan. So I offer that to you not to introduce additional emotion or anxiety, but simply in this moment as we pause and pivot and think about wealth, to acknowledge the reality that for many people, this topic stirs up many different reactions. And I want to commend each of you, because as you already may be navigating professional change or contemplating a change in career, those decision points already introduce a lot of different anxieties, and I want to commend you for including wealth considerations in this moment, in this evening with Laurel and me. Secondarily, as we think about wealth and as I offer you some perspectives, I want to be very clear in how I define wealth. I look at wealth as clarity around your total financial picture. Being wealthy is not the same as being rich. While I'll elaborate on it shortly, being wealthy, put most simply, means you know what's important to you, and you are intentionally moving your money, managing your finances in a way that you understand what you're doing and why, and you're doing it with a level of confidence, comfort, and control. Humorist Will Rogers once said, "Too many people spend money that they don't have on things that they don't like to impress people that they don't really care about." That's not what we're talking about. And especially here for you as professionals in transition, what I want to remind you now in this moment, as you contemplate and navigate many moving pieces in your life, you can look at your perspective on wealth as an anchor, as a foundation, and as a building block to help you navigate and guide and write your next chapter professionally. So in light of that framework with wealth, I'd like to turn with you to the next slide. What does being wealthy look like? Being wealthy means having clarity on your total financial picture. Now, this is not rocket science, but for too few of us, with so many things happening in life, we lose sight of what our total financial picture looks like. And when you're a professional in transition, it's more critical than ever to distill down all the moving pieces into the key fundamental building blocks and understand that which you control and those things that you can't control, so you can be most effective in your professional decision making. As detailed here, your total financial picture, at the heart of it are 4 components. What are your sources of income? What are the items you choose to spend your money on? What are those items you choose to own? And what are those obligations that you are owing something to, and on what terms? And the reason why I reinforce and distill this down in this moment is that when you're a professional in transition, the ways in which those 4 components of your financial life have perhaps been managed to date may necessarily need to be revisited, changed temporarily, or potentially altered in the intermediate or longer term. And how are those 4 components most often supported, reinforced, and managed over time? I like to think of them as the 3 Ps: the people, the processes, and the plans. Who are the people from whom you derive your income today? What are the processes that you oversee to ensure that these 4 components of your financial life, A, exist, and B, continue to be manageable on not only a day-to-day basis when you're not changing careers, but how do they necessarily perhaps need to adjust when you are going through a professional transition? And thirdly, what are the existing plans you may have in place normally before a major professional transition happens? And how will those plans potentially need to adjust as your time during the workday changes as well? Key thing here to emphasize is that your total financial picture is comprised of 4 elements: income, expenses, what you own and what you owe, and people and processes and plans that are continuously dynamic, continuously in flux. And when you are in transition and you're balancing all these variables that are moving and you wonder, what can I control? What are my finances all around? Think of this picture. This is how it all comes together. And as we go to the next page, when I talk about variables, when I talk about things to control, I'm talking about this both as a fiduciary, and for clarity, a fiduciary in the financial services industry means your best interest. So I offer you this perspective not only because I'm a designated fiduciary, but also as someone who's gone through this herself personally. So when you're going through a professional transition, identify and manage those things you can control, and acknowledge those things you have different degrees of influence over time. So as illustrated here, looking from left to right, those things in your control, those things in the green, include your savings, your spending, your choices around investments you have made to date, and you will continue to make going forward as you both navigate the immediate transition and sustain it over time. Choices around insurance that you're making. Perhaps you are covered by your current employer, and perhaps coverage may need to look different in the intermediate term as you're doing bridge work like Laurel talked about, and how that may change over time. And additionally, debt management. These components of total control as you're navigating and prioritizing your professional transition, take comfort that these are the things that you can actively manage. And some people will say to me, look, Carol, there are so many things changing. How can I truly manage my savings or my spending? And I'll say to them, think of it this way. Think of it as a friend of mine told me when she was in a yoga class. Discipline is a matter of self-love. It's the idea that you are taking enough care of yourself so that you can then be there, be present, and be active in the other parts of your life. So even though it may feel a bit out of control, give yourself the freedom and space and self-love and discipline to introduce and use those behaviors you can to retain the total control over those things you have control over today. What are the other components of the financial picture over which you have some degree and perhaps lesser control? The style of work, the duration of work, the earnings and the longevity. And this is what Laurel also alluded to and talked about when she talked about the different styles of work available to you as you try to align your head, heart, and work. Examples of this could mean, from my own experience, I always knew that I was an entrepreneur at my heart, but I didn't know exactly how to make it happen. So even though for many years I worked in finance by day, by night, I was going to school to first get my MBA because I thought maybe I wanted to be a manager in finance. And then once I did that for a bit and did some global management responsibilities, then I realized I love the coordination component, bringing together things to help people solve problems, but it wasn't personal enough. So then I took additional training programs to become a certified financial planner. And as I was doing this, I was doing different styles of work. I was still prolonging the earnings. I was influencing these things I could control, and eventually continuously pivoting to now this new career today. Those are examples of what the sum control looks like over time. And thirdly, no control. These are elements that we all hear of perhaps most often by all of the different media: market returns, macroeconomics, geopolitics, domestic policies like taxes and different policy changes. The thing to emphasize here is, while these things will absolutely influence all of us in some way, shape, or form, when you as a professional in transition have a limited amount of time, energy, and money, acknowledge that this may influence your future, but when you have that limited time, energy, and money, focus on those things you can control to set yourself up for sustained financial success over time. As we then consider that control continuum, with you, I'd like to go to the next page and say, okay, what is it that professionals in transition then can control? What are the things that are most important to control? And this is where I took a bit of creativity again from professional training as well as personal experience. And I call it the 5 financial Bs for the professional in transition. And why 5 Bs? Well, 2 reasons. I thought 5B was a little differentiating and fun. And quite honestly as well, when you're a professional in transition, you're as busy as a bee. If you're not doing your current job or finding the next job, you're trying to just pay the bills, you're dealing with your regular team, you are busy at all times. So what are the 5 Bs that are critical from a financial perspective for professionals in transition in particular to focus on? The first is buddies. And I say this because we all know that there are people in our lives who necessarily have both a direct and an indirect dependency on us and the financial opportunities we provide them. This can be anything from a spouse or a life partner or a child, or many people are in what today is known as the sandwich generation, whereby you might have potentially nearly independent children at the same time having aging parents, neither of whom you necessarily have a day-to-day commitment to, but each of them is going through major life changes, and you may need financial assistance out of your own routine as well. So buddies says to the professional in transition, who are those important people in your life that either today already or those people you anticipate in the intermediate future for whom you have an existing or an anticipated financial obligation. And those are the people you need to think about and manage expectations with around how your financial ability to assist may be changing. From my own experience, this person for me most critically was my husband. And when we moved as a team from Carolyn the entrepreneur, always trying to figure it out, to now the time is right to move from that global corporate executive role into a private wealth advisor, we had many difficult, honest dialogues around what does that total financial picture for us look like, and how will that necessarily change for the next 6 months, 2 years, and 5 years. That's what I'm talking about with buddies and the professionals in transition. Budget. This is straightforward, but perhaps one of the most challenging components for many professionals in transition that I am aware of. And the reason why it's so difficult is not only, as I mentioned earlier, emotionally, that it's a tough topic for many people, but quite practically, when you're a professional in transition, you're dealing with so many unknowns, it's hard to quantify what those incomes and outflows look like over a period of time. So how can a professional in transition achieve effectively this critical component of budget? There are a lot of different strategies, and this is where you have to go with your gut. For some people who enjoy the detailed, tedious way of managing a budget, an Excel spreadsheet where you can track information over time may meet that need. For professionals who like the accessibility of having a budget at their fingertips, many apps are now available that you can download, often for free, on your phone, and you can track budgets that way. In my own personal experience, as my husband and I were navigating my own professional transition, we flipped the budget paradigm on our own experience, and we said as a team, what are the things we absolutely need to pay for, and everything else has to make a business case. And I'm serious. We knew things like our housing costs and our general grocery costs and the general day-to-day, but everything else, it really needed to be on a prioritized basis. And that's how we came up with the budget. So budget will look necessarily different for different people, but it just needs to happen. Business impact. What does that mean? Depending upon the type of professional experience you've had to date, the business impact part of professionals in transition may include the technical tax implications of your future change. So by way of example, if you've been a W-2 employee for an organization and you're now contemplating a side hustle or a gig or starting your own firm or going into a partnership with other professionals, all of those new, different, potential different styles of businesses and business models may conjure up different tax implications, different business planning implications. And so as a consequence, the key thing I'm just trying to highlight to you is balance your desire for the professional transition, not only with your current vision for what it looks like, but consult and consider the tax and business impact implications before going too far down the line. So that way you're aware of your total financial impact of the professional change. Fourthly, benefits. Many professionals, whether it's a transition they have initiated or has been imposed on by them, by the organizations they're currently part of, often prioritize as their next chapter, what will the new salary be? How does that take-home pay compare to the take-home pay I had before? Because many people are compelled to ensure they can continue to sustain the quality of life they have become accustomed to. But here, while it is important to ensure that you are your own advocate and that you are paid what you are worth and are contributing, there is more that goes into the financial picture than the dollar value that goes into your bank account. This is where I highlight to you things like health insurance, life insurance, disability insurance, and other employee stock option and deferred compensation considerations. Ensure that as you make your decision around if you are choosing to leave on your terms and wherever you end up, that you're cognizant and aware that there are other components in addition to the salary to both understand and make informed decisions around. By way of example, different deferred compensation structures, if you have been privileged to have access to them to date, you will be able to derive benefit from differently depending upon their vesting schedules and tax structures. So please consider benefits as the fourth of 5 financial components. And lastly, buffer. Buffer here is the professionals in transition specific version of what all people should have, which is emergency savings. And if you've read personal finance, if you've monitored this space, you know that different financial specialists will say, oh, you need X amount of money, or you need certain number of months of savings. For professionals in transition, from my own experience, I would say there is no golden number, but instead have as much available as that buffer as possible. Generally speaking, for professionals not in transition, for a typical individual, they're recommended to have anywhere for 3 to 6 months worth of savings. But just know that for reference, the goal here as a professional in transition is to ensure there is enough of a buffer or a cash reserve so that you can tap into that as needed as you navigate the change. So in sum, the 5 B's for that professional in transition: buddies, budget, business impact, benefits, and buffer. And as we go to the next page then, following Laurel's lead, I'd like to invite you to consider, as you anticipate and continue to navigate your own professional future, which of these 5 financial B's will you focus on first?
Beautiful. Thank you, Carolyn. So now we're just going to spend the rest of the time answering any questions you might have about anything that Carolyn and I can address. I did get one question through chat that I'd like to answer. And then if you want to, either you can share your questions through chat, or you can just open up your microphones and share them out loud if you want to. But someone asked, and I'll go back to that slide. Someone asked me which one of these pivot types is the hardest to move through. And that's a great question. I've been helping people move through these pivot types to their next chapter for 22 years. And I think every situation is different, and it's easier to navigate through a chapter or a pivot if A, you have help, and B, you know yourself well. So sometimes people come to me and they're completely lost and they're really frustrated and they don't know their purpose and they don't know their passions, and we help them through that. And other times people know themselves really well and they're not doing work that is aligned with their passions and their purpose. And so that's another type of challenge. But I also say that this journey from just a job to remarkable work can be very joyful and fun. It doesn't have to be drudgery. It can be, you know, turning worries into wonder and curiosity. So unfortunately, I don't really have an answer for that person, but I think getting help and getting support and doing the work that you needed to figure it out is so worth it, because on the other side, you know yourself well and you're on a trajectory to really being who you are, not unlike what Carolyn talked about, you know, in her transition. So I hope that answers your question. And if it doesn't, I hope you'll ask me another question. And anyone else can ask us questions. Any other questions or concerns? Whoops, I'm having a little difficulty with my curiosities, questions. People are writing in questions, Carolyn. So do you have any suggestions for making action plans once you've chose your pivot roles? Where do you start? I do. I think, you know, once you start with your pivot type, I think you can, you know, start with that strategy that I gave you, but also delving into that particular pivot type, starting where you're at. So for instance, you might be a learner, but you have some experience with what you like and what has worked in the past. So you can start with your past and you can look at your present and then imagine your future. So whatever pivot type you are, the transition process is really thinking about your past, your present, and your future, and also looking at your wealth and where you are at financially, like, you know, and dealing with all the things that Carolyn talked about. Obviously, like if you don't have a big buffer, it may not be the time to go get your MBA. Right?
Yes.
I always say, like, take a little inventory of where you are with your health, where you are with your work, where you are with your relationships. You know, you can't make a big transition across the country if you have 2 little kids and a husband in New York, right? And then your wealth and how you're making money and how you're, you know, planning to take care of yourself and your family, those are all really important. So start there. Great questions. Any other questions?
I received a question here that perhaps I'll answer, and I'll also invite you to answer as well. And a question was, of the 5 Bs from my own transition, which was most challenging and why? And from my own experience, I found the budget the most challenging. And the reason why I found it the most challenging was because I understood, generally speaking, what my incomes and expenses were in my old lifestyle. And I was going from such a dramatic difference from a global corporate executive with a certain expectation level and a certain structure and style of pay to effectively a brand new structure, a new style of work, a new compensation model. And for me, given that there were so many variables and moving pieces, it was hard for me to prioritize the inflows, the outflows, and what it would look like. So for me, that budget was challenging. And so my husband and I had to go simple in order for it to be sustainable. And it became all about, what do we have to do? And everything else had to be a business case. He's an engineer, so it all had to be a business case. And we got to be very creative and resourceful in ways that we never anticipated. Everything from when we cooked and what we cooked and meals that we would make for ourselves just once because it was indulgent and fun ended up being big pot meals to eat for 3 days at a time. And I mean, you get creative when you're navigating this transition, and it's all about financial savviness to carry effectively. So for me, it was budget, and it's something that I think positively is carrying me forward now too. And Laurel, I don't know, from your experience and your transition as well, were there any of the 5 Bs that spoke to you that you as well?
Well, I think I still need all 5 right now. So I'm whether you're in transition or you just, if you want to have an abundant life, I think I do appreciate what you're saying about budgeting, and I think having a dream really will help you have boundaries. And so that's why, I think our work together really works well together, because I just got reacquainted with an old friend over the last couple of days, and she and her partner have this big dream for something they want to create. So they're so creative. They rehabbed a RV and made it into a tiny.
How cool!
And they, for $17,800, have a beautiful home in Austin in a tiny house park, no mortgage, no debt, low expenses, and it's through their creativity and being good partners like you and your husband, they're socking away their money for their dream.
I love that example, Laurel, and I thank you for sharing, because that is exactly what we're talking about here. Whether it's professionally knowing what brings you alive, aligning your head, heart, and work, or personally, financially, understanding what's available to you now and how can you make the most of it. That's exactly what being wealthy is all about.
And they're so happy.
Yeah,
they're so happy.
exactly.
Like, I know people who have giant houses and several houses and so much stuff, and they're like drowning under their stuff, right?
Exactly.
And the other great thing about having a tiny house, you can't consume a lot of stuff because you have nowhere to put it.
Yeah.
You can't do a lot of shopping. Anyway, I think that's a brilliant example. And someone asked me a question here. Thank you again for your questions. They're magnificent. Do you have any advice when my pivot into bridge work is being a leaper and my pivot into soul work means being a launcher? How do you balance that? That's a great question. And the answer, is looking at your time and looking at your money, right? So, and also looking at your dreams. So I work with people in all different scenarios, but I would say this, like from a motivational and soul standpoint, just make sure that you're spending dedicated time. It may be like 2 hours a week, but spend dedicated time on your dream, be a launcher. But at the same time, you might have to spend 40 hours a week making sure you have bridge work. And then, you know, as you get stable with your bridge work, you might be able to carve out more time for your soul work. As an entrepreneur and as someone who started a lot of different businesses, someone told me once that starting a business will cost you twice as much and take you twice as long as you think. And my experience is it's kind of 10 times as long and 10 times. Maybe other people are just smarter than me though. But I think embracing your job search and embracing the soul work and just managing your time in a way so you don't feel overwhelmed, but you're feeling fed emotionally. I hope that helps you. And any other questions?
I did receive another one for both of us, Laurel, if I may. Okay. And may I tee it up and ask you to answer, and then I'll answer after it? The question is, which of the 7 pivot types were each of us, and how did we know it was a time for change?
Oh, nice. You want me to start?
Please.
Right now, I would say I'm a linker because I'm about to turn 60.
Nice.
And I also just started a new company 9 months ago. So I'm a launcher. I took a company that I had and rebranded it and making it a bigger company. So Compassionate Leader Circle, even though it's work I've been doing for 22 years, it's a new brand, a new company, a new team. So that's definitely launcher. But as I'm about to turn 60, I'm thinking about who is going to be the CEO of this company because I want to retire when I'm 65. So I have 5 more years to get my replacement. And I'm thinking also a lot about my nieces and nephews, and that's why I'm in Texas right now. I don't have my own children, but I want to create a legacy for them and just spending time with them. So that's me. How about you, Carolyn?
Well, I identify, I'm looking at, may we navigate back together to the slide? I have my printout, but I identify most with linker.
Oh, sorry. You didn't memorize my 7 pivots?
No, I printed it out because I love to write on it. But the linker is what resonates most quickly and mostly with me. And the reason why is because of the ones above. I liked what I was doing. It was problem solving, using financial concepts to help people be resourceful and do things differently. I love that part of the financial part of the role, but what I needed, what I was seeking was something around what's next. And it's part of the lever, but for me, I had some fairly significant health issues happen in a short period of time that prompted me to say, what is this work all about? And in my work and problem solving, is there a way I can deliver greater value, have greater impact in the work that I'm doing? So it feels to me a linker because I was liking it. I had a sense that it was entrepreneurial and I wanted to focus on connectivity over time, no matter what. So.
Great questions. Any other questions? I guess we can move on to our next steps.
Great.
So if you want to, you can, through the chat, share your pivot type and your baby step with the whole class right now if you want to. That will maybe keep you on track. maybe one step that you can take in the next 7 days. And if you have questions about that, you can ask them now. And then also the 5 financial Bs, which will you focus on first? So if you want to, you can go ahead and share that in the chat. As we wrap up here, we want to thank you for your time on a November evening. We have a special invitation. So we will be sharing with you follow-up emails and giving you the slide deck that we shared tonight. And we will also be offering a complimentary 30-minute consult. So if you want to discuss more about career and aligning your work with your head and your heart and your pocketbook, you can talk to me. And if you want to learn more about your financial planning, Carolyn will be happy to spend time with you as well. So we're very happy to offer that. Any other questions or closing remarks? Everyone that asked me questions, especially those of you struggling with unhappiness at work, please sign up for a consult. And if you're struggling with your financial planning and the joy of discipline, please sign up with Carolyn, because we would really love to help you. Thank you for sharing your evening with us. Carolyn, do you want to say anything else to close?
I thank you for the privilege of this moment, for the opportunity to share and learn together, and I wish you continued information, insight, and courage as you navigate the professional transition. It's an adventure for all of us, and Laurel and I are right here. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for your participation and all your good questions. And we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone's thanking us for a wonderful session. It was nice to spend time with you.
You as well, Laurel. Thank you. So grateful for all of everyone's engagement. It's wonderful. May I hang up and call you?
Mike, I will email you information and for being here, and I will send you the recording tomorrow, Carolyn.
Thank you, Laurel. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.